This whole time, we've been talking about MPD. It seems like we should have been questioning ISP instead. Hey guys, this is Jules with True Crime Reactions. I just got done listening to the 28-minute long motion hearings that were done today in the Idaho Four case. And I will say, there wasn't a whole lot of information that came out, but the most important things, I believe, are about the training records for the law enforcement officers that the defense team is trying to get from the state. Now, I took a bunch of notes, and I did post my 2.5 pages of notes in my community tab for those of you that want to go and take a look at them. I am just going to be looking at them while I am talking to you right now. Now, I do want to take note of the announcement that the judge made at the very beginning of the hearing, because it seems like in the new amended gag order that was released, I believe it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, apparently the verbiage of this new amended gag order has the media confused, and for some reason the word agents is making media sources believe that law enforcement officers involved in the case can talk. But according to the judge, law enforcement officers are agents of the state the same way that investigators are agents of the defense. That's how Judge put it. So he's going to end up sending out a new and revised amended gag order that includes not only the law enforcement officers, which right? But also any of the retained expert witnesses. They're going to now be a definitive part of that gag order. Now, Ann Taylor gave actually quite a lot of information when it came to the reasonings why they want certain officers' training records. And it's not even that many, guys. It's 3 of them. And so when I first heard that they wanted training records for 3 officers, I instantly thought the first responders. Smith, Nunez, and Gunderson. That's who I thought she was requesting these records for, but I was wrong. So after she started talking, she mentioned how 2 out of the 3 officers that they are requesting training records for are Idaho State Police officers. Now, there was no indication of the agency that the 3rd officer works for. It could be Moscow, could be FBI. Honestly, we have no clue. Now, she also made a statement that she's asked for records for ISP officers before and never had an issue. So she's not understanding why all of a sudden, in this case, she's having a bunch of pushback from the state when it comes to getting these records. Now, according to the state, any involvement that these specific officers has is irrelevant, because anyone that they have interviewed or done anything with when it comes to witnesses or victims, even, when it comes to those surviving roommates and whatever, these people that were interviewed by these officers are not going to be called to testify by the state. This was stated by Attorney Jennings, which is the female that sits next to the main prosecutor in the courtroom. Now, Ann Taylor came out with a list of very specific facts, which negates what Jennings just stated. And I have them all written down, so I'm going to read them out to you. Ann Taylor states that one of the officers did a search of 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantras, white Hyundai Elantras, and this list was given to the FBI in order to aid their search for the correct vehicle. Now, this exact same officer also assisted in the physical search in the area for the white Hyundai Elantra. The same officer interviewed witnesses from the crime scene on 11/13. This Idaho State Police officer interviewed witnesses at the crime scene on 11/13. Now, this next sentence that Ann stated, I listened back to it a few times, and I cannot determine what she actually says right here, so I'm going to give you both ways that I heard this. This same officer either didn't follow up or did a follow-up with some of the key witnesses on the case. Now, if they did do a follow-up, they're doing their job, and it makes it very relevant to them needing their records, in my opinion, especially if these are witnesses that are very important to the situation. But on the other hand, if this officer did not do a follow-up, then that means that they were not doing their job correctly. So I don't know which one she said, and again, I went back several times and tried to listen to this, and I could not determine which one it was. So if anyone knows for positively sure, please let me know in the comments, please. What else I think she stated about this said officer is that they also signed a lab agreement. So I don't know if that means that they brought evidence into a lab and had to like sign off on it or whatever, but for sure, this officer also collected evidence in this case. Now, when it comes to the second officer, I'm going to assume this is also an Idaho State Police officer. This officer also interviewed a key witness that is expected to testify. So for the state to say, oh, it doesn't matter what these cops did because nobody that they talk to is going to be a witness when we go to trial, Ann Taylor is like, no. Key witness that definitely will be being questioned at the trial. So no, you're lying is how I took that. This same officer claims to have a specialty in working with victims, especially trauma victims. So they want this person's training records to prove that this specialty that they claim to have is, I guess, deserved, to make sure they were trained properly, to be able to actually state that to people. I have a specialty in blah, blah, blah. You need to be able to show certifications and trainings in order to state that that is your specialty. I don't think it's too big of a deal that the defense wants this information. Now, this key witness that this one officer interviewed was also interviewed by several other officers, but Ann Taylor is claiming there is a high probability that this second officer will be subpoenaed come trial. So, yeah, if that's the case, if everything is leading to this key witness that this one officer interviewed is definitely going to have to stand and talk at trial, then this information on the training records is relevant to me. Now, this third officer, I'm going to just assume that this is going to be an MPD officer. I don't know whether it would be Blaker or whether it would be Payne. All that we got about the third officer is that this officer did a dozen or so interviews, many after Brian was already arrested. They also interviewed key witnesses and attended the autopsy. This officer also followed up on tips and made decisions on those tips, as well as physically collected evidence. Now, the state tried to be real smart-ass about this and claim that, well, if we give them training records for these three officers, then what's going to stop them from asking for all of their training records? Well, Ann Taylor said, I'm aware there's over 120 officers, and while, yes, me getting these three's information might prompt me to need a few others' information, I have no want to look over 120 files of training records, okay? So the state is really just grasping at nothing. And the prosecutor, the main prosecutor, Santa Claus, he didn't even talk. He let the Jennings lady do all the talking because he literally knows they've got nothing. I don't even care at this point. The state admitted in this hearing every little tidbit of detail on this case that is actual evidence that the state has ever possessed. The defense now has too. And I'm going to remind you all, there is no explanation for there being a lack of evidence in his car, parents' home, apartment, or office. And the state has made it very clear in their latest amount of documents that the strength of Brian KOHBERGER's guilt relies on the sheath DNA. That little sheath DNA that they have on a little metal button, which here soon we're gonna discuss touch DNA and metal. It's actually been quite an interesting read. But they are literally telling us that everything about his guilt relies on this sheath DNA. Never mind the fact there were 2 other male profiles still unidentified to this day that were found next to the deceased bodies. And people want to argue with me about where these 2 prints were found. It states in the area of the deceased. I don't know how much more detail people want on that to make them understand how relevant that information actually is. Now, when it comes to the glove, I'm not really quite sure on the facts of that yet. Now, in my video, mentioned that this glove that has the third unidentified male profile on it was the one that Chris Madonna from the interview room found. But then I had people in my comments telling me that the dates were wrong. And then I was questioning, okay, well, did he really find it on this day, but the video wasn't uploaded until this date, and maybe people are confused. But I personally couldn't find validation enough for me to keep that part in my video, so I got rid of it. Well, a few hours ago, I was watching parts of Court TV, and Chris Madonna was on there, and they were talking to him about the glove, because it was the glove that he found. But then after that, I'm seeing stuff on Twitter from Sleuthy Goosey and a few others still claiming it's not the same glove because the dates are like 4 days apart. So I'm still really unclear about that, but I'm working on it. Now, the rest of the information is about the FBI CAST team and the FBI Forensic Examiner team that gave them the information about the finalized data on the white Hyundai Elantra. Now, Ann Taylor's argument is pretty valid when it comes to the CAST team because the information that the CAST team did is in the PCA that was written back in December. It is now a few days before July starts, and they still haven't received that information for something that should have been finalized almost 7 months ago. So it's interesting to me that she's getting pushback on that because that should have been a document that by now is collecting dust. Now, when it comes to the FBI Forensic Examiner information for the white Hyundai Elantra itself, Ann Taylor is claiming now that she has received the communications between local law enforcement and the FBI when it comes to them determining what was going on with the car, but that she does not have the actual report from the examiner themselves that finalize their decision on what year, make, and model this car was. Now, apparently late last night, she did receive a CD from the state, but it didn't contain this report. Now, at the end of all this, the judge has now given the state a deadline of July 14th to give them over the report from the CAST information and the examiner for the white Hyundai Elantra. Now, this can be pushed back if the FBI gives the state a reason that it is not going to be completed by then, because the state's technically relying on the FBI to hand that information over. But just like we're seeing with the genealogy stuff, the FBI doesn't like to actually show their work. So I'm almost wondering if, just like with the genealogy, when it comes to the cast and the car information, if there's going to be anything at all to even be sent over from the FBI. Now I'm just really wondering, how much actual documentation is there on this case? Really? Now, I've had a lot of issues with Judge, okay? But I really like how he ended this hearing. Because after Ann Taylor lists off all of these very specific reasons why they need these 3 specific officers' training records, Jennings, on the state side, comes up and basically states that everything that Ann Taylor is stating about how important these so-say witnesses that these officers interviewed is when it comes to them actually testifying at trial is all pure speculation. Big word, right? They like to use that word here on YouTube for sure. Well, Judge, he's gained a point of kudos from me here. Judge then tells Jennings, well, you can say it's pure speculation all you want to, but she came with a very specific list of things that these officers were involved in. Meaning, you might think it's speculation, but she just made a hell of a lot of very valid points and mentioned key witnesses. You cannot call people key witnesses and then act like they're not going to be testifying at trial because miss they are. Yeah, you lied. You're lying to get out of having to actually hand over these documents. The question is why? The state should be making sure that the officers that gave them the information that they are going off of to death someone, okay? They should be making sure that those officers are valid and certified and not full of shit. So it's really strange to me, if Ann Taylor is correct with what she states, that in other cases she's had no issue getting training records for ISP officers, now all of a sudden she's getting all this pushback. Why? What is the prosecution hiding that they don't want to hand the defense over these training records? Obviously, there's something that Ann Taylor knows about the way that these officers handled things that she is deeply questioning. Or else why would it just be these 3 very specific names? So, as it stands, we are waiting on a written response from Judge when it comes to the training records, because there's already been a deadline given for the state to give over the cast and the car information from the FBI to the defense. So once that actually gets posted, I guess that's whenever I'll pop back up. See y'all.